So before we start, I just wanted to mention that today, in a way, is a historic day. I don't know if it'll be written up anywhere or spoken about, but it's still a historic day. That we know that even though the Rebbe began with this commotion about Mashiach in the 1980s, but as you know, the Rebbe always spoke about Mashiach. The Rebbe's first Maimer was about Mashiach. And really it began in the times of the previous Rebbe, and that was 1941, during the Holocaust. That's when the Free Rebbe came out with a declaration and sort of an outcry to Jewish people to do everything they can to hasten Mashiach's coming, because that's what we're going through now, the birth pains of Mashiach. So the first time that the Free Rebbe came out with that announcement was Erev Rosh Chodesh Sivan, which is today, 1941. I know we don't do much, but this is just a picture of the announcement. The flag was in Yiddish. It was put out in the Yiddish newspapers, and the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, used a slogan. The slogan was "La'alter le'tshuva, la'alter le'geula," which means immediate tshuva and immediate geula. And every letter that he signed after that, or maybe not every letter, but most of the letters, he signed it, his name. Before that, he wrote La'alta L'Tshuva, La'alta L'Gula. And the Rebbe, who was the Rebbe's secretary then, besides being the son-in-law, the Rebbe printed stickers and gave them out to people wherever they had a chance to stick it on someplace where it would say La'alta L'Tshuva, La'alta L'Gula. That was the call of the hour. And the Rebbe himself said that was really the beginning. That was the opening. And as time goes on, the imminence of Gula is more, the closeness to Gula is more. In fact, then it was more about Rahman al-Islam, the Holocaust and the terrible things that happened. And now it's more about embracing Gula. Okay, I want to speak about number 41 and 42. So you realize that everything that you have here, all these lines, all these quotes, they're just like an outline of a whole subject, and subjects that are discussed in many Maimarim and many Sikhs, but just at least to be familiar with the subject. So another one is number 41. What's 41? 41 is a pasuk in Chumash, which we have here on page 64. No, it's not on page 64. So where is it? Let me see if I have it somewhere else. No. Okay, so the words are that the Torah was engraved in stone. Engraved in stone is not, it could be also two ways. One way to engrave it in a stone and you see the stone. The other way, you engrave it in stone through and through, which means you just see air. And the stone itself is there's no more, you take out the stone in the middle of the letters. So that's how the luchas were written. Okay, you don't see it here. So these are the words Chayrus ala luchis. That's a chumash, means engraved in stone. Then there's another passage which says Mizeh u'mizeh. So one of the miracles were that you were able to read it from both sides. When you drill a hole in a stone in the shape of an aleph, so if you look at it from this side, you see the aleph. From the other side, you see a backward aleph. If you make a letter like like lamed, again, from one side you see it straight, on the other side you see it reverse. Over here, the miracle was that it was faces that went through the stone, and you can read it from both sides straight. It was a miracle. Another miracle, the Gemara says that there are two letters that if you engrave it through and through, how is it possible for the letter to be connected? In other words, let's say you make a lamed, so the top of the lamed is connected to the stone, but there's two letters. One of them is mem and one is samach. So mem is a box, and the samach is also a box. And if you cut it through and through, all around, then it's in the air. So there was another miracle that these two letters, even though it was done through and through, they still were there. So of course, one of the questions are, why was the Torah given in such a way? It's not that they didn't have parchment in those days, because you know that Moshe Rabbeinu, before on the day of his passing, he wrote 13 Sefer Torahs, which was ink on parchment. And every tribe was given one Sefer Torah. And the 13th Sefer Torah was put into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies. So they had parchment, they had ink, and were able to write ink on parchment. Why wasn't Torah given in such a way? A huge piece of parchment, and it was written on it, Hashem Elokecha. So it's explained in a very deep way in many Maimorim. But one of the ways is brought down how it affects us regarding, practically speaking, in terms of our observance of mitzvahs, is the difference between piece of parchment that has written the Torah on it with ink, or letters that are engraved in a stone. The difference is ink on parchment are two separate things connected. And that's why it's possible to scrape off the ink. Sometimes the ink fades away, and that's why we have to go to a sofer from time to time to check the mezuzah, to check the tefillin, to check the Sefer Torah. And because letters of ink, it could be scratched off, and then it becomes disqualified. Or it could fade away, it becomes disqualified. When you engrave letters in stone, it's not one thing, letters on top of stone. The stone and the letters are one entity. Which means the stone is shaped into an aleph, and that part of the stone is shaped into a lamed, and that part of the stone is shaped into a chaf. So that means the stone and the letters are absolutely one. So one of the things that this is here to teach us is in what way we're supposed to acquire Torah. There's one explanation in Chassidus, how it explains the source of Torah. That's much deeper. We won't go into that. But in Avodah, in the practical level, it explains the idea that a person could learn Torah in a way that it's like letters on parchment, which means I am who I am, I have my ideas, I have my perception, I have my values, the way I perceive things, but I accept what the Torah says. So even though I accept what the Torah says and I follow what the Torah says, but it's basically like something else added to me. I have my ideas and I have my ways, but I'm going to follow the Torah's ways. The other possibility, which is the what we should strive for, is that I study Torah and I immerse myself so much into Torah that the way Torah is, that becomes my way of thinking, my way of perceiving things, my values. There's no two things anymore. It's just I become Torah and the Torah becomes me. And I guess the difference is, like we said before, when ink is on parchment, it is separable. Even though generally speaking it's one, you don't even notice that it's two things, but theoretically something can come along and scratch it off. If me and the Torah are two separate entities but very strongly connected, there's potential that it could be separated. But if I study Torah and become one with it, then it's a different kind of a connection, the kind of a connection that this just becomes who I am, and it means me and Torah are inseparable. There are many levels even in this. But just to give an example, there was once a chassid that he was considered one of the greatest chassidim of the Mittel Rebbe and the Tzemach Tzedek. I'm sure you've heard his name before. He was called Rabbi Hillel Parichan, a very big chassid, to the extent that the Tzemach Tzedek once expressed himself and says, I have only 2.5 chassidim. And he gave a name of one person. His name was Rav Pesach, that's one chassid. Rabbi Nata was the other chassid. Rabbi Hillel Parichan was the half a chassid. And people thought the reason why he's saying he's a half a chassid is because he was also a chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek's father-in-law, the Mittel Rebbe. And sometimes the older chassidim had a hard time to rededicate themselves to new Rebbe because they were so dedicated to the Rebbe before. They gave away their heart and soul, their essence, that it's very hard to connect. So maybe it meant the half a chassid is not that connected. And Tzemach Tzedek realized what they were thinking. He said no, because the other half is a Rebbe. In other words, it's not that he's less than a chassid, he's higher than a regular chassid. So, of course, what I'm going to tell you now is something on a person on a very high level, but this is an example. 2 stories which both bring out the same idea. One story was that there's a custom by Chassidim that on Lag BaOmer, they have a farbrengen between Mincha and Ma'ariv in the evening. Now, generally speaking, you're not supposed to sit down and eat before Ma'ariv, because then you can get distracted and might forget to have Ma'ariv. So the halacha is for a man, unless he's going to shul and he has a regular schedule or other circumstances, you don't sit down to eat before Ma'ariv. But there's a custom to have this farbrengen, and he would be there, but he didn't eat. So they asked him, why doesn't he eat? After all, we're all going to farbrengen together, and then we'll have a Ma'ariv. So he said he's just not 100% sure that it's okay to eat. And if it's not okay to eat, then he knows that his throat is not going to digest the food. So he'll end up making a bracha levatol, a bracha in vain. He doesn't want to get into trouble. In other words, his body was so conditioned that if something is not according to halacha, it just won't function. And there's a similar story with him, and this is even more than halacha. This is something according to Kabbalah. I guess it doesn't apply today, but many years ago, definitely there was something about not traveling on a horse and wagon on a bridge, which means when you get to the bridge, you get off and you walk. You don't go on the horse and wagon for whatever reason, according to Kabbalah. So the person who was traveling with him noted that he fell asleep. When it came to the bridge, he woke up. And again, the same thing. He said that his body is so conditioned that if it's something which is not consistent with the way it's supposed to be spiritually, then his body just responds. That's at a very high level. For us, it would mean simply that I become so immersed in Torah, and I was so immersed in, it's not just the words of Torah, the halacha. We're talking about my perspective, my values, the way I see things become so much according to Torah that becomes the pattern of my brain. That's the way I think. I think in a Torah way. That's the way I think. So that's called Oisiz HaChikah. In fact, we know that there are mitzvahs that are called chukim, and there's a Torah, we have the Parsha, which we just read, the chukai side, Telechu, you will walk in my chukim. So it also said the word chukim also has another idea that it implies that the Torah is in a way of chakika. Chakika means engraved, meaning it becomes part of me. I and Torah become one. How does a person accomplish that? I guess it just becomes from learning Torah and the desire and understand that it's not that Hashem has one opinion and Torah has an opinion, and I have an opinion, but I have to submit myself to the Torah opinion. But to realize that this is emes, and this is the best and the most truthful way of seeing things and understanding things, and this connects me to Hashem. So I'm not only connected to Hashem with my actions, with my words, thought, speech, and action, but my whole essence becomes one with Torah, and the way Torah sees things, that's the way I see things. To go a little bit one more step further, so why was it so important to engrave it through and through? Thank you. So, even in engraving, the difference between engraving it through and through or not, if you engrave it, but not all the way through and through, even though these words, these letters are one with the stone, but still there's potential that you could put ink on that area and there'll be something that's separate from the stone. But when you engrave it through and through, there's only air, there's not even any potential for anything else other than the stone itself. Just the letters are part of the stone, and they're one with the stone. And the famous story with the Frierdiker Rebbe that when he sent out yeshiva students to go out and spread Yiddishkeit, they came to a certain place where the rabbi of the city was helping them, and he introduced them to someone, and he said to them, these boys are like Magiim. What's Magiim? Years ago, in a small shtetl, there weren't enough people living there to be able to support their own scribe. How does a scribe make business? He fixes tefillin, he fixes a Torah scroll, he fixes mezuzahs. But if there's only 50 families living there, how much business could he have? So these people who were scribes, they lived in the bigger cities, but in the small little villages, there was not enough for them to have parnasa. So what did the people do if they needed something fixed? There are two options. One option was to pick themselves up and travel to a big city and give it into the scribe that lived there. The other option was there were certain scribes that were traveling scribes. They traveled from village to village, from one small shtetl to another, and they would visit each place like once in 2 months maybe. And when they came there, they would announce whoever has tefillin, mezuzahs, or anything that needs to be checked or corrected, we're going to be in the shul for 2-3 days, bring it there, we'll do all the work, and then we're leaving. So they were called traveling scribes, Magiyim. The word Magiyim means like editing, they would check it out. So this rabbi said to the boys that every Jew has in his heart a Torah. Every Jew. But sometimes the letters fade away, they get scratched off. So they're coming to fix in those letters. That's how the analogy that he used, which appeared to be very beautiful. So when the boys, I guess, wrote their report, they put this in. So the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote back, or he said that the analogy is a good analogy, but it's not accurate. Because letters that are in a Torah scroll can be scratched off. But the Torah that's written in the heart of a Yid is more like letters that are engraved in a diamond. These letters cannot be scratched off. There could be dust that collects on top, and you don't see the letters, but the letters are always there. So that's chakukim, engraved. Let's go to another subject. 45, 46, and 47. 48 and 49, this is something which you're definitely familiar with, but I'm just going to mention it briefly. And that is that whenever the Gemara talks about Moshe Rabbeinu receiving the Torah, it always says Moshe received the Torah at Sinai. In fact, Pirkei Avos begins with Moshe Kibul Torah Sinai. It should really say Moshe Kibul Torah Mahashem. True, he received the Torah at Har Sinai, but he received it from Hashem. So why does it say he kept it from Sinai? Not only that, many places in Gemara, when the Gemara says, where do we know this from? And the Gemara says, this is a tradition that we got from Sinai. It should say, this is a tradition that Moshe Rabbeinu got from Hashem. So the answer is because the word Sinai in itself is a very important part of Torah, and that is that Sinai represents humility. Har Sinai represents humility, and in fact, this is considered Moshe Rabbeinu's greatest quality that made him deserving to be the one to give the Torah. There's a pasuk in Chumash. Here it's number 47, but if you want to look it up in the booklet, it's page 58. On page 58, it says, Ish Moshe, and Moshe was the most humble person, more than anyone else that lived on the face of the earth. So Moshe Rabbeinu's greatness was humility. If you look at the other page, right next to it, 57, that's how Pirkei Avos begins. Moshe kibul Torah Sinai. He received the Torah from Sinai and gave it to Yeshua. So the whole point of Pirkei Avos is to tell us who gave the Torah over, one to the next to the next. So the first giver was Hashem. Should have said Moshe received the Torah from Hashem. So this is also to emphasize this idea of Sinai. Now, if you look at the next page, page 59, this is a famous Gemara where it says in the pasuk, Lama Teradzlun Harim. You can see where it's underlined at the bottom of page of the chapter Tehillim, which means you mountains, why are you arguing? Hari Gavnunin, mountains that have flaws. Ahar Chamad Alakim the Shifte, there's this one mountain that Hashem chose to dwell there, and I'll dwell there forever. What is it referring to? That the mountains were debating among themselves who's more worthy to receive the Torah. And of course, what does it mean the mountains were debating? It means every mountain has an angel, and that angel is in charge of the mountain. And therefore, they were each one brought out their quality that because of that, they deserve that the Torah should be given on them. Hashem said there was one mountain that didn't even argue that it deserved because of its humility. And Hashem said, that's the mountain that I'm choosing, the mountain which is Har Sinai. So that's number 48 and 49. 49 is the pasuk that I just showed you. Lama Teratzlan Harib. You mountains, why are you arguing? And number 48 is the words from Gemara, Mochech Mikol Toraya, the smallest of all the mountains. But we also have something which the Rebbe repeated numerous times, and that is, if Hashem wanted that we should know that receive the Torah requires humility, why give it on a mountain altogether? On the contrary, it should be given on the ground, which is leveled ground, not mountain. Because a mountain is something which is high. And even better would be to be given in a valley that really represents humility. And the Rebbe's answer is, no, you need both. We have to be a mountain and we have to have humility. A mountain means we have to feel proud of who we are. And without feeling that pride, we're never going to be able to make it in this world as a Yid because there's so much opposition, so much ridiculing, so much hate. If I don't feel, this is really what happened when you had so much assimilation. In other words, it really started more than any place else in the world. It was in Germany, with the German movement of Haskalah, the Enlightenment movement, and they were very much into being accepted by the non-Jews. They felt all the anti-Semitism and all that is because we're Jewish and we're different, and therefore we have to make this reform, and we'll be just like everybody else, change our names, not use our Jewish names, and not wear the yarmulke, not do this, little changes, which eventually became bigger changes, and eventually led to total assimilation. But it all began because of the fact that there's a world outside there that doesn't accept us the way we are. So the only way a person could walk through that and not be affected, not be intimidated, not be weakened by it is simply that I feel very confident and absolutely proud of who I am and what I am, and therefore all the things that are going on out there don't affect me whatsoever. So we have to be a mountain, but at the same time, humility. And how could both things come together? So the answer is that the pride that I have is from knowing that I'm a Yid and knowing that Hashem gave me Torah and mitzvahs and have the opportunity to connect to Him and have a special neshama. On the other hand, I know that it's not me, it's all things that Hashem gave me. So therefore, I'm not attributing the credit to myself. And that makes me humble. And in fact, the more I recognize that it's Hashem, the more humble I feel. And therefore, I don't feel myself superior towards others. I don't look down at others. In fact, Moshe Rabbeinu, who was the most humble person in the world, was also the most successful person in the world. He reached the highest heights. How could he have been the most humble person? Because he reset to himself, it's all from Hashem. And had Hashem given other people the opportunity, the neshama, the parents, and everything else that goes along with it, what he gave me, if he would have given it to them, then they would have probably achieved just as much as me and maybe even more. So therefore, he didn't become arrogant because of it, and because he recognized it's all from Hashem. And the fact that he was so great and so close to Hashem only made him more and more humble. So again, achieving things and accomplishing and reaching high heights and having a wealth of knowledge or a wealth of money or whatever wealth it is not a contradiction to being humble when I recognize where it's coming from. I think I always use this example, but I think it's the best example, is that if you would be having a chidon, you'd have a spelling bee, another kind of a bee, and it would be between you and a 3-year-old, and you know more than and better than a 3-year-old, and you actually beat them like the flying colors. Would you be proud of it? Of course not. And why is it? Because that child is only 3 years old. But the fact is still, I know more than the child. Why wouldn't it make me feel proud? And the answer is because the fact that I know more than the child, I get no credit for that. That's just natural that a 20-year-old brain is more capable than a 3-year-old brain. So when I feel that what I achieve and what I accomplish is coming from Hashem, so a person, let's say, was a millionaire and a billionaire, we know that Al Pi Teva, having a lot of money breeds arrogance. Why? Because I attribute my success to me. That means I'm superior to others because look what I'm doing. A person will recognize from Hashem, not only he doesn't feel superior to others, on the contrary, he feels that this is Hashem, and he feels Hashem is being very close to him and giving him so much. The more he feels Hashem's presence, the more humble he feels. So therefore, it's not a contradiction. Any questions? No. Okay. Keep moving. 50-51 is actually relevant to what's going to be tomorrow. What does that mean? It says in the Chumash that on Rosh Chodesh Sivan, which is a few days before the Torah was given, the Jewish people came to this spot, which is Har Sinai, and they camped there. So let's look at Rashi inside. In the booklet here, it's page 22. This has become a very famous quote. Recently, famous songs with these words, Kish Echad B'Lev Echad. But if you look at page 22, you see the pasuk says, so let's look at page 240. It says, B'Chodesh HaShlishi, the 3rd month, which is Sivan, after the Jews went out of Egypt, B'Yom Hazeh, on this day, Bo Midbar Sinai. On this day, they came to Har Sinai. What day was it? So the Gemara says the day was Rosh Chodesh Sivan. And you can see this in Rashi. If you look at the bottom, Aleph, B'Yom Hazeh, Rashi says, on the 1st day of the month. Then at the continue on that page, it says, Vayicha Sham Yisrael, and Israel camped there opposite the mountain. So in English, you don't see anything, but in the Hebrew, Vayichan is singular. but then it's talking about the whole nation. So it should have said Vayachanu, and they camped, not and he camped. So again, we look into Rashi, and the Rashi is the first Rashi underneath. Yisrael camped there. Rashi says as one person with one heart. But all the other encampments, up until this point, there was resentment, there was dissension, there was differences, and it wasn't like one. In fact, it said Hashem would have liked to give the Torah even earlier, but they weren't united, so Hashem said, I can't give them the Torah under these circumstances. So, in order to receive Torah, you didn't have to be Ki'ish Echad, B'leiv Echad, and one of the ways of explaining these words, like one person with one heart, what does it mean? Does a person normally feel fragmented because I have a hand on the right side, have another hand on the left side, have an ear on my right side, have an ear on the left side, so this leg is right and that leg is left? Do you feel like there's a lot of different things in me and I don't feel like one person? So in a community, the one that's right and one that's left and one that's this and one that's that creates division. But in the human body, we don't feel that, even though there are many differences. And the answer is there are many differences, but there's one single identity. Lev Echad, one heart, means there's one identity. It's all me. In fact, there's a Gemara that says, imagine if by mistake the right hand hits the left hand. Does the left hand get angry at the right hand? The right hand is me, the left hand is me. It doesn't make any sense. So basically, if Yidden see themselves as one, that's what helps. That, like the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, chapter 32, then there could be Ahavas Yisrael because it's all one. We're all one entity. But of course, to understand that, we have to meditate that our soul is one, we come from one source, and so on. So that's another theme that's talked about Chassidus, about unity of Yidden, making us into a vessel to receive the Torah. The only question is, what caused it to happen? How come it changed? So the answer is, it says, and they camped there opposite the mountain, meaning Har Sinai, which was designated to be the mountain for Hashem's Shechina to be revealed and give the Torah, even before they got the Torah, just being in the presence of this mountain already had an impact on them that they let go of their personal ego and they all were able to unite as one. This answers the question, which you might remember from Pesach time, that in the Dayenus, we say, if Hashem would have done this, that would have been enough. If he would have done that, it would have been enough. And one of them is, if Hashem would have had us come to Har Sinai and even not give us the Torah, that alone is enough to thank him. How much more so for he gave us the Torah? What's there to thank him if he brought us to Har Sinai and he didn't give us the Torah? It's like saying, well, these people that performed were so amazing. Even if you would have brought us into this room to the theater and they wouldn't perform, would also be left thankful. No, if you come to the theater and there's nobody there on the stage and nobody's performing, there's nothing happening. So if Chas v'Shalom would come to Har Sinai and Hashem wouldn't give the Torah, or before he gave the Torah, what's there to thank him for? So the answer is, this is different. Just being in the presence of Har Sinai was already godliness being revealed, and the godliness that was revealed by the fact that we're in front of Har Sinai, that alone already had an effect on us to make us become one. The same chassid I mentioned before, of Hillel Paracha, there was once a story, and I think it was actually Shavuos, where people came to the Rebbe as usual for Yontif, and they traveled from far and wide as usual, and he was one of the people also that traveled. But when they came, they were very disappointed. They were told that the Rebbe is not feeling well, and he's not going to say a Maimer Chassidus. In those days, there was hardly ever a thing that we had in our times of Farbrengen. The Rebbe would just come out and say a Maimer and go back to his room. The Farbrengens were in the Rebbe's apartment, in his private home, just with family members, some older Chassidim, But the masses, so to speak, all they heard was a Maimer Chassidus. And here they were very disappointed. So Rav Hillel Parasha, he gave that quote. If Hashem would bring us to Har Sinai, even if you wouldn't give us the Torah, Dayenu, we have what to thank him for. Which means just being in the Rebbe's presence, even if he isn't saying the Maimer, but we're in the presence of a place where godliness is revealed, and that alone has an effect on us. 52 is another subject, which the Rebbe definitely spoke about every single year, especially when he spoke to the women. It is again pasuk, and by pasuk of Matan Torah, but let's look here at page 22, where it says these words. Hashem is speaking to Moshe, and he's telling him what he should do. So it says, this is what you should say to the house of Yaakov and tell to the children of Israel. On the surface, it means this is what you should tell to the Jewish people. But the Jewish people are both. That we come from Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Yaakov had two names. One name was Yaakov, and one name was Yisrael. So we are the house of Yaakov, and we are also the children of Israel, the same person. But Rashi says, no, the pasuk is actually alluding to men and women. When it says Beis Yaakov, the house of Yaakov, it's referring to the women. And over there it says, Kaiseimar, you should speak. And the word speak in Hebrew, Tseimar, is more gentle. When it says to speak to the men, the Sagev, Rashi says, we don't have the whole thing here. Oh yeah, we do have the continuation on the next page. And you can speak to them more harshly to the men. And everyone said that the women don't need the harsh speaking, and therefore it's unnecessary. And for the men, because women are more sensitive spiritually, speak to them first and then speak to the men. So women are called Beis Yaakov. That's because a woman is the foundation of the home. So women are called Beis Yaakov. They're the home of the Jewish people. And the men are called Bnei Yisrael. So it says in the Medrash that when Hashem gave the first commandment, it was given to Adam Arishon. He spoke to Adam first. And Adam gave it over to his wife. What were the results? That she ate from the apple, not apple, chas v'shalom, she ate from the tree, she ate the fruit, and she convinced her husband to eat also. So Hashem said, when I'm going to give the Torah, I'm going to reverse the order. First I'll speak to the women, and because I speak to them first, they'll be stronger, and if they're stronger, then the men will also be stronger. The Rebbe always will talk about this, where the Torah emphasizes the strength of women, that the woman has the power to transform the home more than the man has the power to transform the home. And therefore she has that merit. And Hashem speaks to the women first because I guess if you hear something from someone else, it's secondhand. You hear it directly, it's stronger. So the fact that the women heard it first made them stronger, and then they were able to strengthen the whole Klal Yisrael. We have a little bit more time, and maybe we will. I'll go a little bit into this. According to Chassidus, like what is the difference between the source of the neshama of women and the source of the neshama of men? And that's the reason why the neshamas of women have more strength than men. What's the reason behind that? 53, 54. Nope, we don't got enough time. I have enough time for the question, not for the answer. How does the Chassidus begin? With these words, Vaydaber Elokim Eskol Advarim Ha'ela Leimer. What does Elokim usually stand for? The difference between the name Havaya and the name Elokim. Right. Elokim represents nature, and Havaya is above nature, miracles. Which basically means Elokim is godliness concealed, hidden, and Havaya is godliness revealed. So what name should have been used when Hashem gave the Torah? Havaya is the greatest revelation that ever took place in history. And yet, it starts off by Daber Elokim. And another example of that is that what people say at night after Shabbos is over, we read the words V'yitin l'cha Elokim, and we read a whole list of brachas. And these are also considered the greatest bracha. That's why we read it every Mitzvah Shabbos. And again, how does it begin? V'yitin l'cha Elokim. If these are brachas, it should have been Havaya, not Elokim. Elokim is God and is concealed. So we'll go into the answer tomorrow, Amir Hashem, to be continued. Well, really, time is moving fast, okay? I do hope to cover the whole list. Yeah.